Newcastle. Look at this. You are amazing. Thank you so much for coming today. It's brilliant to have packed out this fabulous hall. Thank you for coming. Thank you for taking a stand. Thank you for making your voices heard. Thank you for defending democracy. We are standing here today in the middle of the biggest political and democratic crisis of our lives, because today in Downing Street, the home of our government, we have a bunch of charlatans, a liar and a buffoon in the Prime Minister, selected not by 10% of the population, not by 1% of the population, but by 0.14% of the population. A man who wrote 2 articles during the referendum, one for Remain, one for Leave, before deciding which was best for his career. A man who's threatened to beat up journalists. A man who's wasted millions on vanity projects in London that disappeared just as fast as the lies on the side of a bus. A man who tells porcupines with every breath about kippers, about making buses out of wine crates. A man who couldn't lie straight in bed. Let's not even go there. He's another Etonian with a sense of entitlement to rule in a game where the British people are just his pawns. And let's look at the cabinet around him. We have a Chancellor who shut down our steelworks in Redcar and took 3,000 jobs overnight with the biggest act of industrial vandalism in a generation. We have a Home Secretary who wants to bring back the death penalty. We have a Brexit Secretary who found out just 2 days ago that building a car here in the North East relies on just-in-time supply chains that move parts back and forth across the channel from the single market. And why does all this matter? This matters because these are the people who will stop at nothing to drive their right-wing, slash-and-burn neoliberal agenda through this country, trashing our democracy for their own ends. They are putting up for sale our priceless institutions that have been hard-won, our NHS, our workers' rights, and they are sacrificing our great country on the altar of global free markets, and they go on bended knee to that racist, bigoted maniac Trump. And this is what is so serious today, because it is the people of our region who yet again will pay the price for this. Now, all of us here, we all understand why so many of our friends, our neighbours, our work colleagues voted to leave. We've had here 40 years of industrial decline. We have some of the highest child poverty rates in the country. Youth unemployment in Redcar is 2.5 times the national average. People in London are getting 7 times the spend on transport that we get here in the North East. Food banks are exploding. The rising inequality and the sense of powerlessness are overwhelming, and people here are rightfully angry. But what makes me really mad is how these votes by our friends and our neighbours in this area have been misappropriated. They've been stolen by a bunch of millionaire slash-and-burn Tory playboys for their own ends. They have deflected the frustration and the anger away from themselves. The decisions they have made in Westminster, the 9 years of austerity they have subjected people to, the inequality they created, and they've exploited the pride and the patriotism that the people of this country feel for our wonderful home. And they have turned this anger where they want it, towards the immigrant, towards the foreigner, and of course towards the EU, our friends and neighbours over the channel, because they hate the idea of working together. They hate the idea that we gain more through our common endeavour than we achieve alone, because they hate the idea that the EU limits their right-wing assault on issues like workers' rights, that it supports minorities, that it brings peace through cooperation, not competition. No matter how anyone voted in the North East 3.5 years ago, no one voted for this. No one voted to shut down your parliament, your representation. No one voted for a reckless gamble with jobs and livelihoods here in the North East. No one voted for the destruction of manufacturing on a scale that would make Margaret Thatcher blush. No one voted to devastate the NHS by disrupting the flow of life-saving medicines, including for cancer diagnosis and therapy. No one voted to put 25% tariffs on the exports of companies on the banks of the Tees and put them out of business and on the dole. No one voted for this. These millionaire charlatans, they have stolen the votes of millions of people and they are using them to justify their coup to create the kind of chaos in our economy and society they've always wanted, and which they and their speculating mates with their hedge funds will benefit from. We're now on our third Prime Minister since the referendum in 2016. He has no mandate. He has no parliamentary majority. He has no right to shut down our Parliament, your Parliament, and he has no right to implement that, no right to interpret that vote from 3.5 years ago to suit his own ideological ends. The charlatans and the hard right have stolen the votes of the British people, and they're rewriting the history of the referendum, trying to lie to you as they did back then.